Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're zooming in on a very specific, incredibly volatile snapshot in time, June 29, 2026. This date serves as a really critical window into a hyper-connected world, a place where regional friction can instantly, and I mean instantly, trigger global shockwaves. We're going to unpack 15 major headlines from this single day, and by mapping them all out, we'll see exactly how these geopolitical, economic, and humanitarian puzzle pieces fit together.
Okay, let's dive into this. To make sense of all the chaos, we're organizing our world tour into 5 main areas. First, the Middle East crisis. Second, Russia, Ukraine, and energy. Third, Asian security and posturing. Fourth, global humanitarian crises. And finally, domestic security and economics.
Starting us off, Section 1, the Middle East crisis. 3 concurrent actions happening right now perfectly illustrate the sheer complexity of this region. On one hand, Iran's Revolutionary Guard just launched fresh drone and missile salvos targeting Gulf nations, specifically Bahrain and Kuwait, and this is in retaliation to recent U.S. strikes. Yet, at the exact same time, the United States is actively brokering a border framework in the region. And tying this whole thing together, Qatar is preparing to unfreeze massive Iranian assets as part of that underlying U.S.-Iran peace framework. Actually, Tehran is threatening to completely freeze these interim talks if Western airstrikes persist. Talk about a massive geopolitical tightrope, right?
Now, what's really interesting here is a highly controversial alternative strategy that just entered the mix. President Donald Trump is actively urging Syria to launch a military intervention to systematically dismantle Hezbollah. It's a proposal that has absolutely set off alarm bells across Beirut and drawn deep suspicion from Israel.
And you can see that internal fallout happening immediately. Lebanon's parliament speaker, Nabi Berri, issued a truly stark warning regarding the newly signed U.S.-brokered border framework. He stated that the current terms could ignite civil conflict and severely jeopardize Lebanon's unified national security. It really shows us that these international frameworks aren't just lines on a map. They are creating very real, deep internal fractures within Beirut itself.
Meanwhile, the actual physical reality on the ground in southern Lebanon, it remains completely explosive. The Israeli army completely demolished a massive subterranean tunnel network in the southern Lebanese town of Majd al-Zoun, and notably, this detonation was carried out in absolute defiance of ongoing compliance monitoring. In response, Hezbollah has fiercely accused Israel of committing continuous ceasefire violations, flat out declaring that it reserves the right to respond.
Before we leave the Middle East, let's talk numbers. Specifically, the sheer scale of the economics tied to regional diplomacy. $6 billion. That is the massive sum of frozen Iranian assets currently held in Qatari banks. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian confirmed that, to back up the specific clauses of the U.S.-Iran peace framework, these exact funds will be officially unfrozen and returned to Iran this week. It is a colossal financial lever sitting right in the middle of a war zone.
Let's shift our focus northward for Section 2, Russia, Ukraine, and energy.
Inside Russia, we are looking at a tale of 2 wildly conflicting realities. Internally, President Vladimir Putin admitted for the very first time that Russia is suffering from an active domestic certain fuel deficit. And this is a squeeze so tight it's forcing multiple Russian regions into strict fuel rationing. Yet externally, his projection remains entirely unyielding. During a recent state address, he asserted that despite unprecedented pressure from the West, which he described as using Ukraine as a battering ram, Russian forces will ensure frontline advances carry on across multiple sectors.
So, what is actually causing that unprecedented domestic fuel deficit? Well, it stems directly from Ukraine's unmanned systems forces. They've pushed a highly successful aerial drone campaign deep into the south. Recently, they struck and set fire to 2 separate major petroleum facilities. And this isn't just a symbolic victory for Ukraine. These targeted strikes are systematically crippling Moscow's logistics pipelines. That's what directly results in the civilian fuel rationing we just talked about.
Pivoting now to Section 3, Asian security and posturing. Marking the Korean War anniversary, North Korea executed a sweeping series of military tests. And the specificity of the arsenal tested under Kim Jong-un's personal supervision is intense. We're talking upgraded automated 240mm multiple rocket launchers, brand new tactical ballistic missile warheads, and 155mm self-propelled howitzers. This definitely wasn't a standard drill. It was a major, highly visible technological flex that immediately triggered intense monitoring and security alerts from both Seoul and Washington.
But the crucial point we always have to remember with border friction is the human cost. 36.
That is the devastating number of people killed, alongside 163 others injured, when Pakistani military assets launched a sequence of heavy airstrikes over the border into Afghanistan's Paktia province. It is a stark, incredibly tragic reminder of how quickly regional posturing can escalate into lethal military action.
Which brings us to Section 4, Global Humanitarian Crises.
Consider this for a second. While superpowers clash, who actually responds to the humanitarian fallout? When natural disasters and biological threats strike, the global aid infrastructure is tested to its absolute limits, requiring resources that, frankly, are often tied up elsewhere.
Take Venezuela, for example. Following catastrophic back-to-back 7.2 and 7.5 magnitude earthquakes, the U.S. Southern Command has deployed U.S. Marines to northern Venezuela. They are in a desperate race against time to support rescue operations. The situation on the ground is harrowing. Displaced families are literally forced to sleep in public parks, fully exposed to an incoming storm threat. It's an incredibly urgent, time-sensitive deployment.
We can see a unified response building against a totally different kind of threat over in Africa, where a lethal Ebola outbreak continues to widen. In response, a unified emergency command was activated. First, the Africa CDC, the World Health Organization, and Ugandan government officially launched a joint continental incident management support team. Then, this unified body rapidly scaled up containment strategies. It's practically a textbook example of the multi-agency cooperation you absolutely need to halt a biological crisis.
And sometimes humanitarian efforts are simply about providing long-overdue answers to grieving families. Exactly 1 decade ago, Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 vanished, sparking one of aviation's most massive mysteries. Today, fighting to keep that mystery alive, the Malaysian government officially extended its search contract. So, for the next 12 months, the underwater exploration firm Ocean Infondi will continue scouring the remote southern Indian Ocean floor. The human need for closure, it seems, has no expiration date.
Let's wrap up our tour with Section 5, Domestic Security and Economics.
In Europe, internal security was shattered by a genuinely shocking incident in northern Germany. Heavy police forces completely locked down the downtown district of Stade after a mass shooting left at least 5 people dead. Authorities acted very swiftly, confirming that 2 primary suspects were successfully tracked down and taken into custody. Still, it's a grim reminder that domestic terror and localized violence remain persistent threats, even in highly developed nations.
On the economic front, let's look at Thailand, $113.85 billion. That monumental figure represents the value of Thailand's newly proposed budget bill for the fiscal year 2027. This sweeping bill was officially presented to Parliament with a very specific goal in mind, implementing tighter spending controls and narrowing long-term economic deficits. It perfectly showcases how Southeast Asian economies are actively bracing themselves for the future.
Which brings us to our final thought. We've seen drone strikes in Russia, massive budgets in Thailand, earthquakes in Venezuela, and peace talks deeply shadowed by missile strikes in the Middle East. Everything is interwoven. So I leave you with this. In our hyper-connected era, how will today's local friction create tomorrow's global shockwaves? Keep an eye on these flashpoints, because what happens in one corner of the globe today will absolutely be at your doorstep tomorrow. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the world around you.